story in the gospel again this Sunday. If it was just a question of pride and humility, the Pharisee clearly proud, the tax collector clearly humble, and then there's nothing challenging. We should be more humble and not nearly as proud as we are, right? But there's a lot more going on here that makes this very difficult, because if you asked anybody who was the better person, everybody would have agreed the Pharisee, because they followed all of the laws of Judaism. That's not a small feat. But because they didn't hurt anybody, and they didn't steal from anybody, and they weren't collaborating with the occupying Romans, and because they didn't faithful to their spouses, and they didn't hang out with prostitutes. Like at every level, this Pharisee was a decent human being, as he acknowledged in his own monologue to God. The tax collector, not so much, right? The tax collector, in fact, had hurt a lot of people financially and probably with the violence of the Roman soldiers. And he, in fact, had collaborated with the occupying Romans in order to get wealthy as he turned against his own people. He was the worst kind of traitor, right? And so it's hard to say that this tax collector, just because he humbly comes before God, is okay, right? If we're comparing, who is better, the husband who goes to work every day and takes care of his family and is faithful, and after 45 and 50 and 55 years of marriage, stands beside his wife, and they've built a life together, and they're proud of their grandchildren, or the single father who doesn't invest in his children and doesn't love them and is selfish and goes about his own ways and takes care of his own interests, and later, when his children are grown, tries to build some sort of a relationship with them. Who's better? Who's better? Who's better, Mother Teresa or Hitler, right? But this is where the gospel gets very interesting, because there's a realization when we stand before our God that God is better. And God isn't a little bit better. He's not a lot better. God is absolutely better. Like here's Hitler, and here's Mother Teresa, and here's God, right? That God is so much beyond us that the worst of us and the best of us, it's not much compared to God. And so you'll find throughout the scriptures that much more important than where we are, how much discipline we've attained in our life, how much generosity we've built in, how much virtue we've established, that what matters is what direction are we facing. If we're facing towards God, better to be Hitler facing towards God than Mother Teresa facing away from God. And that is at the heart of today's parable. Whether or not our relationship with God is marked with love or selfishness, whether our relationship with others is marked with love, which is humility, which requires humility, or are we absorbed in ourselves? The Pharisee was absorbed in himself and did not turn to God. The tax collector, who didn't raise his eyes, yet was full-faced in his approach and turning to his God. We're invited, as we look at these stories, to recognize not the importance of virtue and discipline, and these are important, right? It is important, and it is valuable, worth every bit of effort along the way to grow old with your spouse and to look proudly on your grandchildren when they bring home the great-grandchildren, right? That is worth doing. But the story of salvation is even deeper. The story of salvation is God's work, not ours. The story of salvation is relationship with God, not the discipline to build our own lives the way we wish. And so, for us, if if we looked at religion with the eyes of Jesus, we would recognize an immense possibility for God to work in us, for God to transform us, not just into Mother Teresa, but into himself, for God to bring us to that kingdom of heaven, for God to lead us into his own mysterious mission. And we're called to face our God. We're called to have a heart that's open enough, not just to get a little bit better, but to allow God to completely transform us.